I've got something I want to play for you.
Hello, thank you for downloading, listening to, playing MoobTube, a podcast where two men talk about a film because it's never been done before. Hey Owen, how you doing?
Hey, I have smashed headfirst through Looking Glass, and I'm doing just fine.
Oh, great, cool.
You know,
I just went for a run just now. I'm Ralph, by the way. This is Owen.
Yeah. Do you know? I realised we didn't do that on the first.
Yeah, we didn't
episode.
introduce our names the last time.
We were incredibly avant-garde, as you're saying, but yeah, just not establishing like key characters or. We were doing all the things that might have pissed us off about a film, which is we kind of just launched in a non-linear way into the kind of this assumed situation and didn't do any fucking backstory. Actually, we high-lifed ourselves.
Yeah, High Life. Well, we were talking about High Life last week. If you haven't listened, check it out. Especially if you've seen High Life, I think you'll have lots to hear.
We're low lives, but that was High Life.
Repping for the low lives. Everyone is a low life in lockdown. It's just
everyone is. Although I feel like we're. I don't know. I have these days where I feel like we've kind of stretched reality so thin that it's just. It doesn't seem to exist anymore, and we seem to enter this shadow realm of uncertainty and distressing, hyper unreality. Jean Baudrillard died recently.
Wow.
As well, like the great theorist of hyper reality. He
found lockdown too much. Did he die of corona?
He didn't, but I did make a point about that. It's interesting when you see obituaries coming out at the moment, because they explicitly say a natural death. They call it a natural death. Corona obviously being a sort of not natural death.
I suppose it is quite unnatural, isn't it?
Yeah. Are we getting into conspiracy theory territory about whether it's this kind of
no, I'm not doing the lab thing. Don't worry.
Let's not do that. Okay.
Let's not do that when we're beginning to talk about a film with a lot of interesting political subtext. That film being Bacurau. Bacurau is a film from. Would you like to tell us a bit about Bacurau? Give us the lowdown.
I'll give you the quick lowdown. So Kleber, Filho has directed this film. It came out, I believe, this year or end of last year, or has been one of those films doing the kind of festival. It
did festivals last year, yeah.
Festivals last year, release this year. It came actually, I think it was a film that had a release on Mubi simultaneously, possibly, anyway. The film, very simply put, is what they're calling a weird western. It's a kind of western style genre film set in the remote Brazilian outback. It uses a lot of kind of conventions of western, Enrico Morricone, Clint Eastwood style western conventions. But it's also a film that's very much a modern film about sort of globalization, about the third world, about the developing world, about capitalism, about gore capitalism, about murder, belief, fantasy, violence. It's an extremely hyper-violent film. Well, at least it pegs itself as a hyper-violent film. I don't necessarily know if it is what I would call a slasher film. Auto-pegged.
It's a film of a game of two halves, I would say. This film, I think the first bit is it's a story about the people in the town, and there are a few kind of things. There's someone's funeral. It starts with someone's funeral, and someone at the funeral.
It starts with a car driving quite unceremoniously.
My apologies.
Through a load of coffins that have spilled over a road.
An amazing opening. What an amazing opening.
Incredible opening. Actually, one little thing, I'm sorry, we're kind of blitzing all over the place, but one thing I noticed, I want to say it now before I forget, is that this very opening scene, this truck which is delivering water to this town, which has had its water supply cut off by a corrupt local mayor as part of this political dispute. This van carrying water and medicine drives through these coffins, and at first it doesn't notice. You hear this crunch, 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 and the passenger is like, "What's that?" And he's like, "Oh, it's coffins. Look." And then they kind of drive past the accident, and there's people kind of looking at the accident and piling the coffins into their own cars because they're like, "Oh, well," which is like such a nod to like death is going to happen.
Yeah, it's like, we're going to need those coffins, aren't we? Not quite sure why.
Yeah, which is taken. I think that's a scene from like Fistful of Dollars, isn't it? At the beginning when he's like,
really?
He goes
I don't know
past
much about westerns.
My dad is obsessed, so I have this like innate knowledge from years what my dad watching them. And there's a scene at the beginning, I think it's Fistful of Dollars, where Clint Eastwood walks into the town and he's going to take out some bad guys, sort of generic bad guys, and he walks past the town coffin maker and says, "I'm going to need," I think he says 5, and then he kills the guys and there's 6 of them, and he comes back and he's like, "Oh, my mistake, 6." It's kind of this, it's really good. And they do that, but the funny thing about this scene is no one's looking at there's a dead motorcyclist, but no one's looking at a dead motorcyclist. They're looking at the coffins, they're looking at all this future death that's kind of potentially happening elsewhere, and not looking at the death immediately in front of them. And I think this film, one of the messages that kind of comes through is the filmmakers, Filho is saying, let's look at the deaths we don't look at, let's shine a camera and a light at all these injustices and violences.
The coffin motif, I mean, I think that's just great narrative to just start the film with like an image of a major theme that is also like a foreshadowing, a precursor of what comes to pass. But there are quite a few red herrings as well. I mean, I feel like
such as
many. Well, I think the funeral of Carmelita, where the village doctor, whose name is Dominguez.
Dr. Dominguez, yeah.
She says, like, this woman who's died is a whore, this woman who's died is, like, a complete... And then it just turns out that she was drunk, and she apologizes for it later. And there's not really, like, any... I was thinking the film was going to be... I didn't realize the film was a Western. I just went into it completely cold, which is quite good with a film like this.
I think so.
But I just thought that was where the intrigue was lying, in, like, who this woman was and what her life meant, and...
Yeah.
In a way that didn't come to pass. So I was a little bit, you know how they always say, you know, never deny the audience what you've promised them. I felt a little bit.
You think that was kind
denied.
of it's interesting you say that, because I guess we'll come back to this, but certain of my frustrations with this film, and I should say up front, I think Filho has done an incredible job. This is an incredibly watchable, beautiful, harrowing, hypnotic, weird film. I love it, but my frustrations are born from the failure to deliver on certain of the kind of build-up that happens at the start, the packaging and the foundations that he lays at the beginning of the film. I don't think of as beautifully, or they're not realised perfectly for me. Because there's this scene. So basically, there's this small village called Bacurau. It's in a very remote part of Brazil. It's having to ship its water in because it's a local corrupt, kind of hilariously corrupt mayor, Tony Jr. Has stopped their water supply. There are rebels in the area, and you think he don't really explain the political context, and that's what I kind of like about it, because there's local rebels, and in a pure Western sense, it's just it's this kind of semi-fictionalized, imagined space where there's like rebels, good guys, bad guys. It's quite black and white. The villagers are obviously very poor, but very kind of tight. Just, you know, it's Dr. Dominguez who has this kind of outburst at the funeral, but it seems to be quite a tight knit community. And I think at the beginning he shows that this is a functioning, despite all of their hardships and despite the blockade and everything, this is quite a tight knit example of like a good, healthy community where people look out and care for each other and have a lot of solidarity and community strength. But there's these little suggestions. Obviously, this village, unlike the imagined village of a Western film, which always seems completely separated from the wider America, this village has, you know, people obviously have all these hallmarks of modernity. So the funeral has this kind of funeral lorry, which has these huge speakers and like OLED TV screen in the back of it, which has like music blaring out of it and lights. And there's a local DJ who's like the master of ceremonies, who's kind of like narrating the funeral. There's like mobile phones. People are constantly on their phones in this. And the key like element of the outside coming in to this community is this like the mention of drugs, but like medicine. There's a mood inhibitor called Brasol 4, which kind of appears in several places. So people are kind of basically banging loads of opiates in this film as well.
The doctor knows about this. In one of her speeches, she tells, it's wonderful actually. She says she takes a packet and she describes the effects of the drug, and then she says, "You can take some. There's a big box of it here," and then she like throws one box into the bin,
which presumably is hers.
Yeah, it's a beautiful gesture. It's like, she's just
because maybe
like, she's like, you know, make of this what you will. I'm not telling you what to do, but like this is what's happening. You are being like, they're attempting to sedate you. You know.
Yeah, and it's quite. I mean, in that way, we are looking at, obviously something that Nan Goldin has kind of documented in America, which is the opioid crisis, and it's kind of, I think, pointing to that and pointing to the medicalization of communities in the world, that kind of the fact that to exist in modern society you need to be doped up, bred in circuses, drugged up. I think that's part of the narrative. It shows how these kind of global medical corporations, big pharma, can obviously ruin people who are already incredibly vulnerable on the edges of society, because I think it's implied that this is a sort of semi-indigenous community in Brazil, very far away from like fancy capital cities. It never says how far away it is from anywhere, and actually the most interesting thing is when there's a local school teacher. He's this quite endearing character, and he is talking to a group of children and showing them where Bacurau is on a map. And this alludes to the kind of weird stuff that starts happening, but he realizes Bacurau isn't on the map. He's like, it should be here, but he's using Google Maps or Google Earth, and it's like the village has disappeared. There's just dust and stones and wizened old trees, but the village has disappeared off the maps. And I think maybe you could explain the next bit, because the next bit is after you have this kind of funeral of the local matriarch, and you have this setup, and there's this like kind of poor but surviving community. We understand that stuff, like classic film thing, in the bridge section of the film, stuff starts to go weird and stuff starts to go wrong. Maybe you could talk about that.
So this is the way in which I would see the film as being in two sections, and it's wonderfully alluded to in this very cute scene that you refer to in the classroom with the. And then he ends up pulling down a paper map and saying, "Oh, but look, Bacurau is here on our map here." But it's not until later on a few other strange things start happening. There's some UFOs, like sort of UFO-style drones that are kind of hovering around, which are also like a way of taking the audience off track a bit, because you think for a moment that it's like a sci-fi thing.
For sure, it's this little B-movie red herring, like you said, yeah.
Exactly, and then, I mean, we're giving away loads of plot spoilers, but whatever.
Exactly, but whatever.
I think films are more enjoyable when you know what happens.
We're watching these
Shakespeare
films, so
proved
people...
that. So what happens is like there is this secretive army base with various people of different Anglophone people from
wealthy
Germany,
Western Europeans,
wealthy Western Europeans and Americans. German accent from Udo Kier, who
Udo.
I want to have an Udo Kier section of the show, perhaps not now, but
can we please dedicate maybe the finale of the show is like an Udo Kier kind of crescendo, crescendo.
No. I'm not going to do my Udo Kier Starmer joke.
No, you just did though.
I just did. That is the joke. Forensic. He's just such a good actor. He's in forensic so archaeology. Many. Okay, we're doing our Udo Kier thing. He's in so many. He's in so many mad films. He's such an extraordinary. Like he's worked.
He's
with
a kind of
Trier,
Christopher
Herzog, Fassbinder.
Everyone. He plays he's kind of like a Christopher Walken character who's known for his particular intensity, intense eyes, incredible face. I guess it's what people used to call like a character actor, and still kind of do. Which is, I always think, is a weirdly disparaging thing, because I think the kind of people who become character actors are often a lot more interesting anyway. People like Ed Harris or whatever. But yeah, he's 100%. He's got serious like art house chops, and he's got serious kind of like Hollywood chops as well.
This makes it the perfect film in a way, because this is like a art house western.
It's 100%
peerless.
Western.
Wonderful. Anyway, so what I was going to say is, two things. There's one, we have a regular section of the show now on sexual violence, or sex and violence, the relationship between sex and violence. But yeah, firstly, there's this Western imperialist conspiracy basically to erase this town. It's not exactly clear what the plan is, because the plan is derailed quite early on. When two of the members kill some people from the town without that being really part of the... So it's kind of strange. You sense that there's a plan, and from what we know of the way the West has treated Latin America across the 20th century, we can sort of deduce broadly what the plan would be. But and
as we saw, and these things often happen in very visibly. This is the shadow state, the shadow army, the American-funded coup in Nicaragua. It's even the hilariously failed coup in recently, just a month ago. Was it a month ago? In Colombia, where a kind of shady.
Was it Colombia? It was the guy that Corbyn was mates with. I love how fucking informed I am.
I'm so uninformed.
Who is the guy? Evo Morales.
No, it wasn't Morales.
That was Bolivia.
Was it Bolivia? No, there was a failed coup
in Colombia as well. Oh, shows what I know.
And
that's where the FARC is, right?
Do you know what? I'm going to step away from this conversation because I was just out of stupidity today.
Shocking.
FARC, I think it is FARC. Although they've signed.
I'm sorry, what
FARC
did you say?
has signed. FARC. Fucking hell. FARC has signed a peace treaty. With the government. That's
okay.
Yeah, but anyway, regardless, so there's a group of mercenaries, or either they're trophy hunters or mercenaries or whatever. It's not entirely clear why they're here, but we kind of the story pivots basically from the village and a series of deaths that happen, kind of quite Western style mysterious deaths, like a farmstead is shot up. Two guys discover it. A whole family's been killed. 7 people, and then we kind of flip, and the POV flips to this group of mercenaries led by Udo Kier, and it kind of implies that they're soldiers of fortune, but also implies that they've paid to do this as a kind of like trophy hunting thing. I think they've paid to be there.
Have they paid to be? Okay, so it's like paintballing or something. Yeah, they really seem to be enjoying themselves, which leads me on to the sex and violence section of the show. There's a scene
where... Is there a jingle for that?
Where we'll find something from High Life, probably. There's a section, there's a bit where a man and a woman in the Western imperialist paintballing group shoots, very violently kill an older couple from the town who drive out to investigate what's going on, and their whole car
they're escaping.
Sorry?
They're escaping.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
And their car gets, claret all over the dashboard. It's not very pretty. And then the couple who did the killings, or they're not even a couple, they're just, I don't know, flirting, just have sex, like...
right in the field where they've done it. They're gorged and swollen with this bloodlust, because all of them are obsessed with body count, and even call it that. It's like body count.
They love it, and the drone flies over, and so everyone in their team can see them fucking.
They get surveilled.
They get surveilled while fucking, and like that was like just the immediate obviousness of, yes, we've killed some oppressed people. Now we're going to fuck to celebrate.
And this is the only way we can get our rocks off.
Yeah, that struck me as interesting.
It's interesting, and it's really poignant in a way, because what we learn and what we see of the mercenaries or trophy hunters is that we don't really get any backstory from any of them, which is probably fine. They're quite two-dimensional, reasonably weak characters in a way. But in a way, I suppose what's happening is they're being turned into stereotypes, whereas the villagers are being filled with human warmth and backstory and complexity. And what Filho has kind of done is flip the cowboys and Indians scale. So, the traditional Western, you've got the cowboys who've got the Westerners, the white people who have got this depth of character and are granted the privilege of backstory and identity and complexity. And then you've got the Indian, who are just cardboard cutouts. And this film really, if anything, is an inverted Western, because what's happening is the cowboys are the Indians and the Indians are the cowboys. The white Westerners are suddenly the bad guys, and the Indians, who would typically fill the role of the bad guys, are the good guys, and we invest in them very heavily for the first half of the film. Like you said, it's these kind of 2-3 sections. And one thing that Filho does is we get this kind of anthropological film for the first kind of third, and it's very ethnographic. And I think that's really important, because I think when I did a bit of back reading on this, Filho and Dornelles, who he wrote it with, screened a short film they'd done a couple of years ago at a festival that was also showing quite a lot of anthropological film, and they got quite a lot of influences from that experience apparently, and they're like, oh, this is interesting, wouldn't it be interesting to make an anthropological film that was also a kind of genre film. And so what you see at the beginning is the creation of this very complex community. You know, we see their funeral rites. We learn that they've got quite a lot of spiritual beliefs that are kind of non-Christian. In fact, the church is closed throughout the film, because at one point a guy's like, well, it's not closed, but nobody uses it, because the guy's like, I'll go and open the church up, and they're like, no, the church has always been open. But when they go in there, it's like dust sheets. No one's using the church. It's this kind of non-Christian part of society and community. And one thing that the start of the film does is it kind of implies that they are interpreting these deaths that are happening around them, these external forces that are attacking them, because they're a community under attack and under threat, that they are interpreting them as through this lens of kind of animist belief and spiritualism. But what actually happens is it kind of flips, and they figure out relatively quickly that they are under attack by mercenaries. A guy very bluntly figures out that the UFO that he sees hovering over, which is probably designed, the hunters probably assume is supposed to fool these simple locals. Straight away he's like, it wasn't a UFO, it was a drone. Do you remember that section? There's a farmer, and he describes, and he's like, There's an understanding, there's an interesting thing about like tactics of warfare, and like at least for me, there was a quite a sharp switch from me thinking like, oh my god, the West are so powerful, they can just they get a bit sweaty and sunburnt, but they can basically just kill anyone anywhere. And then it all went a bit Afghanistan, and there was like quite a strong sense that like these people were like way out of their depth, and they'd been like, yeah, they'd been sussed by the residents of Bacurau. Yeah, they were completely...
Particularly
Lunga, who we haven't talked about yet, who is the head of the bandits, the head of the rebels. There's this other group who I guess are kind of mirror image. The marked man, they're the mirror image of the hunters, I suppose. But they're also outcast from society. They are in kind of open conflict or war with the local mayor and the local government, which is kind of implied why there's this water dispute. We don't understand how... We understand later that they're actually from the community of Bacurau itself. But they come to the villagers' aid. I'm not sure the villagers really need it, to be honest, but they come to the villagers' aid and help fight off these mercenaries. And that's really the second half of the film, is this flip where the arrogant, heavily armed, cardboard Western mercenaries come to this village, and we think there's going to be a classic slaughter, that they will come in and they will walk away victorious, killing and scalping everyone in the village. That obviously doesn't happen. That plan is frustrated. It's a failure, because the village has these huge resources and actually becomes this well-oiled military machine, basically. Did you have a feeling did you feel that's where the film was going, or how did you feel the film was going to pan out?
I thought the film would be bleak and would tell a story of like an impossible defeat, at the hand, by a victory for the West, another sort of brutal. Because that's sort of what, if you look at like Harold Pinter's Nobel Prize speech, there's like, a kind of aching, like there's a sort of need to speak, but then it's a genre piece. So it reminded me of Parasite in a way, that there's like this revenge justice that happens that kind of corrects a political they both spoiler alert, they both films end with someone being buried underground, but not the same person, not the same figure, crucially.
A very different
and I thought that was why I found Parasite to be a more interesting film in that regard, because even though some revenge is taken, the oppressed still face like
at the end
quite
horrifying. In Parasite, they have to survive. He has to ultimately survive as the parasite. Whereas this film is because it's a genre piece, there has to be an unambiguous winner and a loser. And here, the narrative flair is to say, it's a what if, and it's an experiment in that sense. Is what if these local communities actually have huge, a well of strength and solidarity and resource that they can fight off this cartoonish West that's shown to be a paper tiger, and the West is shown to be a paper tiger. I think you're right. I think Parasite is a much more subtle film, even though they share a lot, because they're both darkly funny films. I don't think you could deny that. They're both very beautiful. They're both very staged and stylized, but this film doesn't have those ambiguities at all. This is very much a story of right versus wrong, in a very clear way.
That's why I didn't like it as much. I think it's funny, like it's very impressive, and I get why loads of people told me to watch it, but it didn't like tell me something about the world I didn't know.
It created a fantasy, which is what the revenge film does in a way, I suppose. And the fantasy here is this kind of moment of triumph for these people who are ordinarily oppressed. And there's many moments like that where they get to have their moment of victory. There's a scene where the local mayor, Tony Jr., comes on the campaign trail, and the village has a network of observers and spies because they are a community under threat. They're a body that's being invaded. And a series of phone calls comes down the line saying the mayor is on the campaign trail. And there's this hilarious like cavalcade of cars, like big 4x SUVs and Jeeps, and this big massive lorry with a huge LED. Like there's a theme of the LED screen of this video of him smiling on the side of it in this weird little GIF animation.
There's a whole song about what a great mayor he is.
Yeah, of course, I forgot about that. Yeah, and song is another important part of this film, but we can come back to that. And this cavalcade of the mayor turns up in the village, and by this point everyone's gone into hiding. So it's the classic Western deserted town, ghost town. And he comes in, he's obviously having to try and get their votes, even though I presume the implication is it's kind of quite a rigged system anyway, but he needs to kind of at least get nominal support from this community, even though he's stealing their water. And he comes in, steps out of the car, and he's a classically kind of city boy, well-kept, kind of like soft-looking, very clean, as opposed to this quite earthy, dusty little village. And he drops off some supplies, like he's trying to bread and circuses this community, and he drops off a lorry load of books which he dumps on the school. Just like in a tip truck, he just dumps these books in front of the school. He drops off some food, and then he drops off a box of medicine, which is the medicine we talked about earlier. And eventually the kind of people of the village start reacting to him, and they start kind of trying to chase him out and swearing at him, calling him a liar. And he's kind of, it's a really, really amazing scene. Like the film has these beautiful moments, and he's kind of crushed and shown to be a complete embarrassment. And he's kind of ceremoniously evicted from the town, basically. He has to kind of drive away. But he does take something from it. I mean, this is where there's complexity. There's a sex worker in the village who is effectively forced to go with him. And you remember Dr. Dominguez kind of intervenes.
He has some power over them.
Over their bodies.
Yeah, for their bodies. Yeah.
And it's quite. That's why the scene's quite complicated, isn't it?
There's a lot that sort of doesn't add up for me, but that kind of works in it.
Like what? Do you think? Sorry, I'm asking you to pull something out of your hat, but
I suppose just the kind of contradiction of like. Well, they have to give the woman to him
hand the woman over to him
for the night, in order to get money to survive, but they can still show him total defiance. There's a certain there's a dignity that they're allowed that I would say perhaps maybe they wouldn't in real life.
I think it's this performative resistance. Have you seen any films by Jean Rouch?
No, he's the anthropologist guy, right?
Yeah.
He got cancelled, didn't he?
I think so.
Anyway, it doesn't matter.
I don't know about that. Okay, let's
not talk about things we don't know about, like coups.
Yeah, let's stop it. Fuck. Cancelling. But Jean Rouch made a film called Le Maître Fou, Master's Madness, in I think 1955. And within this film, it's a study of I think it's in the Andaman Islands in the Pacific, and he kind of films this local kind of tradition that's in the sort of 50s, where the villagers dress up in these kind of overly exaggerated costumes that they associate with the West. They dress up like generals and like fighter jets and footballers in these kind of grandiose, hilarious, almost like caricatures, and they run around and have this fake military procession. And the kind of anthropology behind it is they have this form of resistance to the master's culture, as it were, by adopting their dress and lampooning it in this kind of hilarious way, and they're laughing. That's why it's called the Master's Madness, and they have this moment of madness, and it's them showing the West to be exotic and stupid and theatrical and pointless. And it's a toothless thing because it obviously has no effect on the power that the West exerts over the developing world, but it's this moment of resistance and denial, and it really reminded me of this kind of the way they use kind of pageantry and theatre to deny power even while they're completely subject to it, because like we said, they have their moment of resistance, but they still ultimately accept the drugs and the food and the books, and they still give this the sex worker over to Tony Jr. So they have their resistance, but they also ultimately denied freedom from it. They're still victimized by it. That was my kind of take on it anyway, and it's kind of it felt like Filho was kind of playing with these ambiguities. There
was a certain grace to their vengeance.
Yeah, they held their heads high throughout, I think, whereas everyone else is shown to be absurd.
Yeah, the West are sleazy. Foolish. I mean, there's something sort of gross and sleazy and tacky and careless and petty about their violence. I totally get that.
Yeah. What did you think about the mercenaries, and particularly the Udo Kier character as their commander? Because he has quite an interesting narrative arc. Maybe you could talk about that.
So yeah, the Udo Kier character is the commander of these paintballers, I'm going to call them, and
gamers.
Cologne, yeah. I don't know if he has much of an arc. I mean, there's a bit where someone calls him a Nazi, and he really exerts
upset.
He becomes very Nazi about it and says, "You don't call me a Nazi. I've been in America for 40 years, and you're only 38." And that seems to settle that dispute. Although the guy's very teenagerly with him, he's like, "Oh yeah, whatever, man, whatever. I don't care, you fucking Nazi, whatever." What did you say?
Designed to be hated.
Just called you a Nazi. I mean, whatever.
Nasty. That's they're quite cardboard. Those characterizations.
Yeah, I mean, you were saying earlier about how like it's a kind of an inverse, and I'm just not that interested in like it's like this thing with it happens with gender as well. People say like what was a good example? Was it someone said about Normal People that the no, it wasn't Normal People. It was Little Women. Same
Normal Women
type
yeah.
of thing.
Yeah.
So, someone said about Little
They're the same
Women.
film.
Yeah, so, was it Philip Pullman said that he thought the man in Little Women was underdeveloped. I haven't seen Little Women.
Timothy Chalamet, yeah.
And someone replied to Philip Pullman being like, yeah, underdeveloped like all women in other films. Or something.
I didn't
like,
see that
and
exchange.
It was just like, yeah, it's like, let's level up, you know. Let's not.
Oh, I see. So he was frustrated in a Philip Pullman-y way. He was like, "Oh well, you know, it's a good film, but you know, the male character was a bit wooden and two-dimensional."
Yeah, and then the comeback to that argument was like, well, you know, get used to. It was a woman saying like, get used to the fact that women are frequently underdeveloped in films, which is like true, but like that's not an argument in favor of having underdeveloped characters of any gender.
No,
that's just like, oh shit, the scriptwriter, and that's like why you have writers' rooms. That's why you like, why we have like a critical culture around writing, so that characters are not, you know. So it's like, I felt a little bit like that way about this film, where I was like, you know, the Western characters are pretty cardboard, and that makes it less enjoyable to watch, less engaging for me. Because also in any film, I'm most interested in the psychology of the oppressor anyway. Like I'm more interested in the bad guy, why they're bad, what's going on for them. So like the fact that there was so much attention given to the people being oppressed, there was that felt like well, I mean, saying this I sound like I don't care about I sound kind of dumb when I say this, but like a lot of time was spent giving nuance and subtlety to like that wonderful woman Teresa early on, you know. She was a very fascinating woman.
Which one was Teresa?
So she was in the van right at the start.
She's the visiting doctor who's coming from West, not from Brasilia,
she brings some vaccines. She just had an immense dignity and intrigue to her.
She did. She was a very kind of because I think the film implies that she might be the main character. As well.
Yeah, the film implies that she's important, and then she just isn't. You know, that sort of thing.
We see nothing of her.
It's like, so I just thought that was a bit of that felt a bit incomplete, and in a way like you give so much attention to her and then nothing happens to her, and then you just suddenly parachute in these like quite two-dimensional baddie westerners, these
bro hunters, basically,
and then they become the film hunters essentially.
And I think the film, this was what I was signaling earlier about my like frustration with what the film didn't deliver, and it's like I was interested in the forces that gave rise to these oppressors and to these hunters, these trophy hunters. I was less interested in seeing the frat house behavior between them in their campsite, because it didn't add anything. It was done badly, and I wanted to see the village, and to be honest, like I would have been more happy and more kind of satisfied just to have them to be quite anonymous, totally cardboard figures, you know, sort of just these uber soldiers, as it were, and spend more time with the village. Because what the film, when we were talking about the bridge of the film and this middle section when stuff starts to go weird, it has the burgeonings of a kind of magical realist film where the kind of occult and the strange begins to slip into this settlement, this village, and so there's the town disappearing off the map, but obviously it turns out that they're using electromagnetic pulses, EMPs, to kind of block satellite signals to the area. And they address that very directly. He's like, oh, it's a good thing we use the electrical pulses to block the village's signal off the map. There's that bit. We learn that the mysteriousness of these dead bodies appearing, the villagers being murdered, we very quickly after that happens flip to the killers, and it's like no, I wanted that tension to be played out, like who is attacking this village. I wanted to be with the people under siege as they tried to figure this out, and it kind of didn't play out that kind of tension and complexity in the middle part, the waistband of the film, for me enough. And it very quickly went, oh yeah, these deaths and the disappearing off the map and this weird shit that's going on, actually that's down to these hunters that we're now going to spend half an hour, 40 minutes with. And for me,
it's genre, isn't it?
Yeah, this is, I guess, the limitation of a genre film.
A quality of a genre, of like a genre film, is that you focus on the how of things and not the why. So like there's kind of an implicit assumption like we're going from A to B and B is filled with bloodshed. So, you know, like the question is like, you know, who's all these fascinating things about like who's got a gun and who hasn't got a gun and who manages to take the upper hand and all that. That's all done extremely well, and I was riveted throughout that. But yeah, that doesn't sustain my interest quite enough.
No, I felt impatient
because I want more
sections.
from a movie that like that gives so much at the beginning, that lays so much.
Yeah, because it sets up the potential for this hypnotic, surreal, fantastical combat, basically, and it kind of turns into just a kind of conventional like Alien versus Predator situation. But I think in my head, I thought it was going in a particular direction. I thought there's like a really famous work of anthropology by Michael Taussig called The Devil and Commodity Fetishism.
Oh, he's good, Michael Taussig. I've read a little bit.
Michael Taussig is amazing, right? And this book is, I think he wrote it in the 80s, late 70s, 80s, and it's like incredibly dry name for a book, but it's such a good book. And he studies communities of miners in Bolivia, and he kind of notes the oppression for these miners and mining communities has been endemic for centuries. Like there's always been a landowner, a landlord. There's always been someone who's been siphoning the wealth off of their labour and exploiting their labour. He said in the modern age of capitalism, that's Western conglomerates increasingly. But he says it's not like there was this good time beforehand, the good old days, and then capitalism. He says it's a constant process of you know, Marx. It's like this constant process of extraction and oppression. It's been going on for centuries, if not thousands of years. And what he does is he looks at this whole situation through the belief in the devil and Satan and devil-like characters, because obviously Christianity was another import to this part of the world, going back to like the 1500s, early 1600s. And historically, the devil has always been this kind of stand-in or metaphor for the forces of exploitation. So the miners have lots of statues of the devil that they put in the mines in the villages. There's all these beliefs about the devil, and the devil is this physical representation of forces of exploitation. He said under capitalism, the devil's role expanded to absorb Western style extractive capitalism and gore capitalism. So he said it showed that these local beliefs, these very ancient beliefs, were able to kind of adjusted and absorbed kind of changes to them, but the society had been oppressed for centuries. I've given a very like basic read on it because it's like a 400-500 page.
Did you say gore capitalism?
Gore capitalism, yeah. This very hyper-violent. There's a book with semiotext about this called Gore Capitalism. It's really good. It's literally about this, and it's based on South American case studies about this kind of hyper-violent capitalism. It's basically saying that neoliberalism is too bland a word to describe the practices of capitalism. It actually is. It's a very willingly violent thing.
We see the neoliberal bit, but some people see the gore bit.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, in some, it's just the free market, and the free market is indifferent. And she's saying the free market isn't indifferent. The free market is actively evil. And it's kind of what we're seeing here in a way, because this film, but the problem is there. So this Michael Taussig book implies that, and that's what I thought this film would be. I thought it would be this community using their local beliefs, practices, webs of historical understanding to kind of understand what was attacking them and use that to counter it.
It doesn't quite disrupt the hegemony of like rational Western thinking, does it?
No, because it
sort of does slightly, but like it's basically like who can hold a gun better, you know, like essentially that's what it comes down to.
They've got the jump on the bad guys, and they kill the bad guys.
Lunga's good with a gun.
Yeah, he's the hyper violent one, isn't he? He's the one that kind of. It's very.
See, I'm against violence.
You
in
don't
a way,
condone
like,
this act of fiction.
Yeah, I was watching it with my friend Penny, and I was like, oh, I'm not sure about the revenge, and she was like, oh, you know, come on, it's a bit cathartic, isn't it, when they all get sliced up?
Yeah, it is. But they don't. It's kind of like, it's a weird thing because obviously this confrontation happens, and obviously the baddies, the hunters, get killed. But and we can talk more about the actual ending. But one thing about Udo Kier's character is he kind of like ambles around for a bit, and he obviously holds these people in a lot of disdain because he's still a atrocious person, but he
holds his own people in disdain, doesn't he? He almost has more respect for the enemy than...
Yeah, which I guess makes him the kind of like noble hunter motif, right? He's like, he understands the Indian and he kind of gets it, and it's almost like that. But there's a bit where he kills 2 of his own people.
Yeah, just for a laugh. What about what's that all about?
I don't get that. I completely. I paused the film now because I was like, I don't understand.
That's another thing that doesn't. Yeah, earlier when you asked me what doesn't add up, that doesn't add up.
Yeah, because he's like pointing a sniper rifle at a town, and the villagers have all gone into hiding to ambush the attackers. And he's kind
got
of
a silencer. He loves his silencer. It makes a beautiful noise. The silencer.
That is kind of like thunk noise. And then he just he shoots a dog, and someone says, "Hey man, did you just shoot a dog?" And he's like, I would never do that.
And then he shoots a woman, and then did you shoot that woman? He's like, I would never shoot a woman.
Oh yeah. And then he just nails 2 of his own team for no discernible reason, and then he tries to kill himself.
Yeah.
He points he gets his gun out and points it in his mouth, and he's about to blow his brains out, and then a farmer comes up behind him and is like, "What the fuck are you doing on my land?"
Yeah, he's like, well, you're not going to kill yourself. We're going to make you die in a very slow and unpleasant way.
But why? I don't understand. Why is Udo Kier's character doing that? That's the bit that I just didn't get. Because, what do you think? I don't know.
He's stuck. A masochist. He just loves. He's like
killing.
I think he's mad. I guess that's the implication. Maybe the implication that there's something in continuing the metaphor, that there's something in Western society that loves violence so much, revels in it so much that it ends up bringing it upon itself, and has such a disregard. You know, in the same way that the United Kingdom currently has the highest per capita death rate for coronavirus. In a way, this is finally the imperial violence that we meted out onto the world is coming home to roost.
Coming flooding back.
Maybe that's the metaphor. I don't know.
It could be. I mean, that certainly requires a lot of mental gymnastics to reach that place.
That's what you come to this podcast
gold.
For. Mental gymnastics.
Beijing Olympics, fucking mental gymnastics, gold medal. That's what you're getting right here.
Mental contortion.
Yeah, I can kind of see that this self-destructive form of capitalism that it's almost accelerationist, right?
Because it's so undignified. The violence of the West is so undignified. It made me think of those pictures from Abu Ghraib, the kind of.
Right.
That's what made me I was really reticent to say that the violence of the West was caricatured, because I was I know that the West this violent.
It was tame, if anything, based on the violence that the West is capable of.
So then I didn't. But then I was what? Yeah. Anyway, we're coming up to the hour on this.
We are. I think. Should we talk about the end very quickly? Because I think the end was the crescendo moment. So obviously the good guys kill the bad guys. Very simple, rough and ready kind of explanation there. And then the moment of victory, not only is Udo Kier being captured, but the local mayor turns up. Mayor Tony Jr. rocks up in his little cavalcade, and it turns out, do you want to take the baton?
He gets rocked out. He's stripped, and a sort of gimp mask is put on his face, and he's reverse. He's put on in a reverse cowgirl position. There's a lot of that in the film, actually. Anyway.
Reverse cowgirl. Yeah, he's reverse cowgirl up
town. Out of town on a donkey.
Presumably to his death.
Yeah, one can only surmise that he's going to slowly be buckarooed into the ground. Yeah, I mean, obviously, in some ways you take pleasure in it, in other ways it's no.
Some people go for that,
Is that the end? You mean?
On this podcast.
Or and the guy Udo Kier gets taken down into the vault.
He gets buried underground,
and he says, "This is just." This is just the beginning, he says from behind the bars.
Yeah, this is just the beginning, or this is not the end. It's one of those two.
This is just the beginning, he says, which suggests a sequel.
Bacurau 2.
Bacurau 2.
Bacurau again.
This time
Fast and bloody.
Production is delayed due to coronavirus.
Oh. The other thing I wanted to mention was that when Mayor Tony turns up, he's got a welcome wagon with him. There's a van with loads of water in it, and the implication is that he was waiting to find the hunters who have successfully finished their mission and killed the townspeople, and implying this was they were mercenaries that were hired to do this by the local mayor because they had become an obstruction to him. And so this was a moment of local corruption meeting. It was effectively a shadow coup, a kind of proxy war, local politician using external shadowy military operators to destroy a kind of nascent rebellion, which is what happens in
He just doesn't come across as even clever enough to deliver something of that scale.
No, I feel like I had to squint to do that, to come to that conclusion, and it felt like that was again a moment where it could have been more. We could have spent more precious narrative kind of exploring those global machinations. And I think the problem there was, like, it was interesting reading what Filho had said about the film, because one thing he was very adamant about was on the festival circuit, when journalists interviewed him, they're like, "Oh, is this a film about your displeasure with Jair Bolsonaro, obviously deeply unpleasant president of Brazil?" And he was like, "Yeah." It's kind of, yeah, he said that obviously that's there, but the message he was making, which is kind of fits into this Michael Tausig message from earlier, was that their exploitation and oppression is a centuries-long issue that has affected this country and other countries in the developing world and the global south perennially and with great aggression. This isn't just about Bolsonaro, this is about history. And he kind of made that point, and it was then frustrating to see the film, him say that, and then obviously the Guardian and whatever, Peter Bradshaw, kind of reviews, and sort of taking this Bolsonaro message, and it's like you're flattening the complexity of what I think Filho was saying. And Filho is a film critic.
People want films to be propaganda, don't they? That reinforce their worldview. They want it to. They want. Oh yeah, Brazilian film. Can you just tell us why your guy's bad?
Yeah, it's almost like we can only absorb this film if its message is about current affairs. You're only allowed to make a film if you're from the developing world, if it's basically an Al Jazeera documentary. And if it doesn't fit into those simple categories, then it has to have a flat explanation, like, oh, this film is against Bolsonaro. And
I'm glad it was more subtle than that. But yeah, I feel like our reverence for the film has faded over the course of this hour.
It really has. I went in with such high hopes, but to be honest, I still really enjoyed it. Like, as a piece of genre film, it's fun, and I think
it's stunningly watchable. But I probably wouldn't watch it again.
Do you know what I would? I feel like I do want to watch it again.
There's probably more that I'd pick up. I'd probably be maybe kind to it if I saw it again.
I think it's worth watching the start. Watch the first hour of this film, and then walk away.
Really?
And read Michael Tausig. Yeah.
What a prescription.
Tausig.
That's what this podcast will be. Watch this section of the film we just watched, and then here's the theoretical text to
we're doing pairings. It's like
it.
wine pairings. We're doing theory pairings. Because we're obnoxious. I hate myself.
I don't hate yourself.
Good. On that, soul crushing note. Yeah. So I think it was great. But I think it had a lot of failure to live up to the enormous promise that it had established. This amazing foundation that it built for itself.
The kind
of structure collapse. Do people love it? Who loved it? Tell me. I'll go to their house.
My friend Beth, my friend Daniel, my friend Borba, who's
maybe we're wrong.
So yeah, during this conversation with various parents, I thought, maybe I'm just wrong.
Fuck it, maybe
again.
Maybe again. Shit. So okay, we're going to revise.
Come to this podcast for wrong opinions.
Yeah, we're saying what other people are too clever to say. As we're complete rubes, we have failed to identify who Fark is, and we've misread the film entirely.
Someone's got to speak for the over puffed intelligentsia.
Intellectuals.
All right. Thank you so much for listening, everyone, and tune into our next podcast, which will be about another film, which we'll decide shortly.
I want to go
Truffaut.
The Truffaut. I'm a Truffaut.
You're a Truffaut. All right then.
He existed.
It'll probably be the 400 blows. All right. Take care, everyone.
Yeah, I think it'll be 400 blows. All right. Peace out. Bye.